All right, perfect. Well, thank you again for being here. We have a great panel here today to talk about different educational paths, other paths in education for your SA expat journeys, and just a very quick notes about some of the ways that this will work. You're all muted. You do not have the ability to mute yourself, but you are welcome to put questions in the chat at any time, and I'm happy to weave those into our conversation. If you would like to ask a question anonymously, you have two ways to do that. One, everyone would have the ability to change their name on the participants list. So if you go to the More button, if you hover over your name, you can change it to whatever you want it to be so that you could ask a question without identifying information. The other option is for you to send me a message privately, and I will see whatever your Zoom name is, but I will not use it when I ask the question to the group. This is being recorded, and on your screen there is a bit.ly link where you can find all of our panelists' bios for the entire panel series, so definitely check that out. Our panelists have been so generous with not only giving their time for these panels, but then also sharing things like their LinkedIn profiles, their resumes, and additional resources. So make sure you check those out, not just for this panel, but all of the panels. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to have my fantastic panel introduce themselves, and we will start with Vashae.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vashae Dixon. I am originally from Kentucky. I live in DC now. My background in student affairs was mostly in housing, and I did a stint in Greek life as well. And currently I work as a research strategic leader at EAB.
Hello, I'm Jillian Iffland. I am currently the director of the Neurology Education Office for the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Primarily before this, I did academic advising in several different venues, but I also did do a 2-year stint in residence life as well.
Hi, I am Megan Krone. I am the Executive Director of Academic Coaching and Editing at Heartful Editor, and my background is in collegiate recreation. I was there for 14 years before making my switch.
Hi everyone, my name is AJ Lauer. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm the Outreach, Diversity, and Education Team Lead and SIParCS Director in the High Performance Computing Lab at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. Prior to joining NCAR, I worked in residence life for a couple of years, student life, student activities, and also student union / student events.
Hi, my name is Walaszek Dermody. I use she, her pronouns as well. I am currently a higher education consultant with Pearson Online Learning Services, or academic strategist. I currently live in Nashville, Tennessee, and prior to my time at Pearson, I was at Vanderbilt University for about 5 years in the Dean of Students office as Director of Assessment and Special Projects. So assessment, accreditation, project management, strategic planning, communications, etc. And I've also worked in academic affairs at Ohio State University.
Great, thank you so much to all of our panelists. I'm so excited to get this started. So we'll start with our first question, which is just to talk about what you do in your role. So you gave us all your titles, but I need to know a little bit more about what your responsibilities are. And what I'm really curious about is how your background in student affairs has allowed you to do those responsibilities. So what have been the transferable skills? So Jillian, we'll start with you for this question.
Sure. So in some ways I am still like very much like one toe in the water sort of with student affairs life. I am working for the University of Maryland, so I'm a state employee. I have a lot of benefits then that are, still attached in that world. That was obviously really attractive to me as well. But I wear a lot of hats right now as well, similar to what we all know from student affairs life. So primarily what I do is I work with the clerkship, residency, and fellowship programs in the Department of Neurology at the University of Maryland. So we're training our physicians and everything, getting them ready for independent practice. So I primarily, I'm the the coordinator for the residency program. So I work with the program director, who is a physician, who is in charge of the residency program. I have two or three, depending on the time of year, employees that work under me who help coordinate with the fellowship program, with our medical students who come through for rotations that way as well. A lot of what I do, though, is actually program planning and execution that way. So, you know, I put on graduation for our department. I do other large scale like learning lecture programs. I coordinate like help coordinate our weekly grand round series, different things like that. It's a lot of like our interview season. Oh my God, recruitment, huge thing. So I do a lot of different tasks like that. And that's primarily what I focus on. And then most of the sort of nitty gritty administrative paperwork kind of stuff is what a lot of my employees help me with.
Great, thank you so much. Megan, how about you?
Yeah, sorry, there may be an airplane going over me right now. So, as executive director, I do direct student support. Maybe I should pause and let you go to someone else because it's really loud where I am.
No problem, we can do that. AJ, do you want to go?
Sure. So my role is Outreach Diversity and Education Team Lead in the High Performance Computing Lab. So high performance computing is giant room-sized computers, and those giant room-sized computers are used to support the research that we do at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. So when we run climate models or weather models or models for what the sun is going to spit out at us, we need huge computers in order to do the computation for those models. And so my team's job is to inspire the workforce to consider high performance computing as a field. It's a very niche part of computing, and so a lot of students don't hear about it or don't have any idea that it exists, maybe until graduate school. And so my team does a lot of work with undergraduates and 6th through 12th graders to try to help them understand what high performance computing is, why it's important, and why it might be a cool career field for them. So in order to do those things, we have a few kind of fronts that we run. One is outreach events and activities, and that includes designing technical outreach elements, such as a miniature supercomputer that can run one of our weather models that you can build yourself at home. We have 3D printed weather stations that can teach you about how data is collected and used for weather prediction, those kinds of things. We also, visit conferences and talk to students. We have an exhibit up at our supercomputing center. And so my team actually currently is in the process of revamping that exhibit. So I get to do a little bit of work in the museum space as well, which is very cool. And then we also run an internship program called Summer Internships in Parallel Computational Sciences. And for that, we have 13 to 15 students that work with us every summer on all sorts of projects related to computing, with a primary focus on increasing the diversity of the workforce for high performance computing. And then diversity is also a pretty major component of what my team does. So in our organization, we have a diversity and inclusion course called Union. That's a 4-part course. And 2 of the people on my staff, myself included, are facilitators for that course, which has been, I think we're up to 10%, I think, of our organization has been through that course at this point. We also advise on various diversity and inclusion related initiatives and issues throughout the organization, which has been very interesting over the last month or so. And as part of that, I'm also currently serving as the inclusivity chair for the 2021 Supercomputing Conference, which is the largest high performance computing conference in the world. So those are a few of the things.
Great, thank you so much for that. Megan, how does it look there?
Yeah, I'm clear now.
Okay.
Sorry, there's a small airport nearby with student pilots that it sometimes makes laps around the house. So I am with Heartful Editor, and what we do at Heartful Editor is I like to think of it, the best way to explain it for people in the higher ed context is it's kind of like a writing center, but more geared towards grad students and doctoral students. So we work a lot with students on academic writing. So that might be when they're finalizing their dissertation and they just need to do all that APA editing that they don't want to, it's so tedious to learn. So they'll just send it to us for formatting. Or it could be much earlier in the process where we're coaching them on papers or working with them on their doctoral proposals to teach them academic writing so that they don't need so much editing at the end, because the editing process at the end can get a little pricey. So if you learn it yourself as you go, it gets a little less expensive. So it's really fun because I get to, as the executive director, do a lot of direct support of students. So I haven't, even though it's grad students and doctoral students, I haven't really lost my student connection. I get to directly support them with coaching and editing. I also get to support our directors and editors. So I have a team that works for me on their student projects. So I'm helping coach them through timelines, reviewing their work, helping them learn APA and just the style of writing, academic style of writing a little bit better so that they can coach their students on it. I also do project distribution because we have a couple of campus partners. So I get to, with all of our campus partners that do long-term projects like dissertations, I distribute those projects. And then things are just constantly shifting. We're a really small business. There's now 3 of us full-time as of last month. So we're constantly changing things. So as of Monday, now I'm in charge of our social media. So it's just kind of fun because we can propose new ideas all the time. So my roles are kind of shifting the more creative we get. So the main part is student support, editor support, but then things are changing in fun ways all the time.
Great, thank you so much. And Laura, tell us a little bit about yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for Pearson Online Learning Services as a higher ed consultant, and Pearson's obviously a really large company that most people are more familiar with from textbooks or maybe testing is a kind of another way that people know them. But they have an online learning services division where we work with universities who want to or are already launching an online degree program, which is of course quite timely. I am one on my team. There are probably 5 of us, and we all have higher ed backgrounds. And so some of us come from student affairs, some of us are faculty. But a lot of the other people that we work with at Pearson have no higher ed background. So my role is really kind of being that intermediary person. I primarily work with universities when we're in a pre-contract phase where we're trying to launch a program with them. I will, pre-COVID, come to campus, try to understand from the faculty, okay, tell me about your program. What are you really proud of about your program? What kind of students do you want to attract? Who would be interested in this program? And so I try to help them kind of be this intermediary. I'm not the salesperson. I'm not trying to sell them anything. I'm trying to understand from them kind of their goals for the program and then help them craft a program that's going to be successful in an online environment. And is also sort of mindful of some of the things we know about a student who is doing an online program. They tend to be older, working, balancing multiple demands, family demands, work demands, all of these different things. And so we want to set up practices that are going to help those students be successful. So then I work with kind of the faculty and the student affairs folks to sort of put that into practice. So I really enjoy it, kind of getting to be that sort of intermediary role. And then I guess when I'm not traveling, a lot of it is like research and preparation to sort of get to that point. Or I have a portfolio of universities, so sometimes they'll ask questions about how to enhance a program or like what are sort of new trends in the marketplace. And so I'll help them in that regard.
Great, thank you so much, Laura. And Vashae, we'll have you close out this question for us.
Yeah, so I work at EAB, which is a education research firm. We also have a tech division and we have a consulting division with enrollment services and financial aid. So lots of different facets. I particularly work in the research division. And so I work with about 30 institutions in California, New York, and North Carolina. So no geographical groupings there, but I work with large institutions on our research forums. We have 10 areas that we consider ourselves to be experts and provide what we call best practice research to institutions. Of those 10 research forums, student affairs is one of them, but I help manage all 10, which can be anything from facilities to business affairs, academic affairs, anything that you can think of in the entire lifespan of a student. And similar to Laura, I go to those campuses. I do a lot of strategic planning with those campuses about what are your top of mind concerns, what are your up at night issues, and then I help map them to the resources that we have at EAB. And that can be through a number of different ways. Maybe we come to campus and facilitate a half-day workshop. Maybe we just do a webinar, which we're doing a lot of those currently as everyone is, not traveling. It could be that we map them to one of our diagnostics and then go from there. So I really work with each individual campus and even further with each individual division within those campuses based on what their partnership is for, to map them to the resources that we have and kind of serve as their research liaison in that way.
Great, thank you so much for those overviews. I feel like there are jobs that I did not know existed in many ways, so that's helpful. I want to know a little bit more about like your first year on the job. So what were some of, coming from student affairs to your roles, what were some of the gaps in knowledge or skills that you had, and how did you fill those gaps? So we'll start with Megan for this one.
Yeah, I'm still in my first year. I started in mid-August of last year, so I'm almost at my year. But I had been with the company as a side gig. Most of our editors are doing it as a side gig. So I had been with Heartful editor for 2 years before I jumped on board full-time. So it's been kind of interesting because the company, I jumped in probably just a couple months after the company started. So it was just our editor-in-chief, Dr. Sarah Henry, just all her by herself full-time, and then working with a team of us part-time editors. And then she decided she needed another full-time person, and I was ready to make the jump. So my first year has been learning with her. So I'm her first full-time person. So it feels like my learning curve is the same as her learning curve, which is the company's learning curve. So we're lucky that we've been just experiencing constant growth. And so it's been, how do we restructure? How do we change things? How do we make things more manageable? Do we want to take this contract? Can we handle it right now? Do we need to hire more editors? What's the process for it? Do we want to hire editors? Because it's really important to us that we meet our standards of being both excellent at what we do, but also have this, the reason it's called Heartful Editors, because we take a really intentionally caring, supportive approach. She comes from student affairs too, and so we're both really value that caring, kind, supportive aspect. So we've always, when we're hiring, do we want to, lean on the great editor that they're really good at the technical details, or is it more important for us to have the philosophy and that caring attitude? So it's been interesting. She and I just connect regularly, and we had a team of an executive team. The other two are around more. Well, one just came on full time. We have another that works about 30 hours a week. So the four of us just weekly meet and decide what we need to restructure and what we need to do, which is totally different than my experience in higher ed, where you have to go through and get permission and whatever. It's one Monday we meet, and the next Monday that change is happening. So that's been a really different thing that I'm still not quite used to, but it's a lot of fun, and it just is so much more flexible than what I'm used to doing. That I'll think, well, we discussed this change. How long is it going to take us to make it? And Sarah's like, it doesn't take us any time. We just do it. This is a different thing. So yeah, things change quickly, but we can try things, add things, drop things quickly, which is different and new. So that's been my year, that I'm still just getting used to the flexibility of not working in higher ed directly.
Great, thank you. AJ, what was your transition like in that way?
So I think there are two things that really stand out. For one, I am not a computer scientist and I'm not an atmospheric researcher. And so working at an organization that does both of those things was quite a shift. I had a lot of terminology to learn in my first year just to be able to speak about what my internship program was. we every year go to this supercomputing conference, and I started in September and the supercomputing conference was in November. And I remember standing at the booth being like, you just said a sentence to me and I have literally no idea what you asked, because the terminology and the jargon is just, it flies so fast. And so I had to spend a lot of time in my first year just trying to understand that terminology, both so that I could understand what my colleagues were saying, but then also so that I could do the education programs that we were trying to do for the public. So that was a really huge thing. And then the other thing that has been really interesting and fun is learning about how to talk about diversity and inclusion to scientists, because it's different than most other populations. We have to spend a lot of time up here in the head and saying, this is the case for this. This is why you should, here's some empirical evidence as to why you should care about diversity and inclusion in our organization. And then you have to get them to trust you enough up here in order to bring them down to the heart part of the conversation so that they can get it here. And so when I started, we were in our first cohort of that diversity and inclusion class, and I joined right at the end of that first cohort. And so we've really done a lot of development over the last 4 years to make sure that we're taking our colleagues from here to here in an effective way so that we can cause change in the organization. So those are two of the things that have been pretty big learning points for me. And then I would just echo what Megan said, also just learning about not having to take work home and being able to just have like a 9-to-5 job, I think was also a learning curve, not being on call and those kinds of things.
Great. I appreciate all of that. And I think that your point in the beginning about not knowing anything about, having a sentence where you didn't know any of it in the beginning, that's really useful for people, because I know sometimes you can look at a job description and you're like, well, I don't know anything about that, but you might not need to for what the job is.
Absolutely. And so my position when I started, it was as though someone had taken my student affairs resume and plunked it down in this field that I had never heard of before. And so I was going through the position description. I was like, well, event management and working with students and running a summer program. I was like, I can do all of these things, but what is high performance computing? And so the transferable skills thing is absolutely real.
Great. Thank you so much. Laura, talk about your first year and those gaps.
Yeah, sure. Like Megan, I'm still in my first year. I started in September rather. And one of the first things my supervisor suggested I do was to try to conduct informational interviews with all of the different functional areas that I was going to interact with. And my team, a lot of the people that work at Pearson are already remote pre-COVID. So that was pretty easy to do via, Teams meetings or whatever. But one of the individuals I did that with, one of the first things he told me was, the quicker you can understand the business part of this, the better off you'll be. And I tell everyone that in your role. And I still don't think I fully understand it, but like I understand the higher ed piece and I understand the academic piece of it. But now I'm working in a company that's a for-profit entity that there are financial decisions or ramifications behind all of these different decisions that you're making with different partners. And so understanding how all of those different suggestions that I would make or what the institution wants to do, how that all impacts the financial piece was definitely a learning curve for me. I think the other part of that as well is I came from 2 R1 institutions, and I thought I had a pretty good sense of sort of like the institutional landscape and understood sort of what were the hot topics in higher ed. But now I work with such a diverse portfolio of universities, and their concerns can look very different. Some concerns are universal, some concerns are really different. I worked at institutions that were very faculty governance centered. So you had to have a lot of faculty buy-in to kind of get change. And some of the universities I work with are that way. Some are very top down. If the provost says it, that's what's happening. No ifs, ands, or buts from the faculty. They probably are still complaining, but they have to do it. So trying to understand the different institutional types and kind of like figure out like what the concerns are here and how to kind of speak to them and and sort of build credibility was another piece. And then very similar to AJ, understanding the language. So I understand things at the macro level, but now I have to go talk to computer science faculty. And I don't know, but now I do know that discrete math is the opposite of calculus. And so when I asked that question and they looked at me, you know, but having to be able to kind of talk fluently in their language, and I always sort of now preface it like, I'm not an expert in your discipline, but I am an expert in, you know, change management and digital education and things of that nature. So, you know, I apologize if I get any, you know, terminology wrong, please correct me. And so I try to acknowledge that, but there is a lot of times stuff I have to learn about language or like the health fields too. Like I've worked with speech language pathology programs, and I know that Jillian works in, you know, the School of Medicine, so there's probably some similarities there, but like understanding clinical expectations and residencies and all of that pieces, all those pieces, it's all been a learning curve. But to someone else's point, I don't think it's daunting. I think all of the things, like there's stuff in student affairs that I didn't know what that was. Like I worked on a mental health project. I knew nothing about counseling centers before I had to work with one. And it's like people, you know, in the student affairs field have gone through a lot of education. They're used to reading literature, trying to understand a topic. So I don't think it's insurmountable at all, but it's just something I had to be cognizant of and realize that I may not know this particular discipline, but I can still like add value here.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that, Laura. And I think to your first point that you talked about, like learning the business aspect of it, I think to some extent that can be scary for student affairs folks, but I also think that in some ways it's quite freeing, because a lot of times there is a level of not talking about the fact that there are business decisions behind what we do on a campus, and yet there still definitely are, even if we're from nonprofit institutions, right? And so when you can acknowledge that there is something that you need to know about, like the revenue and the expenditures, and have those conversations more freely, I think that that's probably nice.
I think you're absolutely right. Like I'm sorry, but like every university is making business decisions, whether or not they went to say that publicly. But it is interesting to hear, you know, provost or someone say, like, you know, if we don't have enrollment targets, like that has huge impacts on, you know, all of these different pieces. And so I agree. I think it is a little daunting, but it's a reality and of kind of especially the landscape today.
Great, thank you. Vashae, what was your first year like, and what was your learning curve?
Yeah, so similar to Megan, I'm still in my first year, and so still learning. I think to kind of piggyback on what Laura said, learning the business side, in my student affairs experience, in my housing experience, I did the budgeting and personnel, so I knew that there were, you know, I knew there were numbers involved, and it was my responsibility to kind of make sure that that was all flowing correctly. But I wasn't responsible for bringing in money or retaining money. I just got a pot of money and had to manage it. And now I'm responsible for, you know, renewing so many contracts every year and bringing in new business and expanding our partnership at different campuses. And that is sometimes a little uncomfortable to have those types of conversations or to have to engage from that lens. So I would definitely say that that was a learning curve. I think that another learning curve that I had was there is much more autonomy in this role than I've ever had previously. There's always been some type of protocol in my previous student affairs experience. As we all know, like things happen that you simply just won't think of to write in a handbook. Like who would have thought, you know, there'd be monkeys on the third floor or something, but there's some type of protocol that's outlined that you're trained on. And in my current position, they really hire you and trust you to do it the best way that you know how. And so I would ask a lot in the beginning, like, do you think I should go visit this partner? Should I just call this partner? Like, and my supervisor would be like, do you want to go visit them? Like, do you think that's a good idea? You know? And there was very little, like, oversight maybe isn't the right word, but there weren't a lot of restrictions to that. It was very much based on, this is your pool of 30 some odd schools. These are your renewal targets. These are your new business targets. go. And that for me was very, very difficult in the beginning, but it's now very liberating almost. It really has helped me to boost self-confidence, because I'm starting to see like the fruits of that, and like, okay, the way that I engaged with this institution worked really well. I should definitely do that again. Like, I'm learning to trust myself a lot more. But it was totally a learning curve to kind of step out and have that level of autonomy that I hadn't had before.
That's great. Well, congratulations in that too. That's really exciting for you. Jillian, we'll have you wrap up this question for us.
So I have been in my role for 3 years. So I've had kind of time to figure everything out, so to speak. My first year was an absolute whirlwind. For me, I compare it to when I jumped into residence life. That was my first job out of my master's degree. I actually, aside from being, an RA at that point, like I did not do residence life for like my graduate assistantship or anything. So my full-time residence life job was my first real experience with it. And that was, just kind of jumping fire by baptism, baptism by fire kind of thing. And this was very similar in that regard. I had like very little training that happened. It was just kind of, like what Vashae was just saying, like, this is what you have to do here, go and do it. And so that was like really pretty terrifying. My first year, I was just like a deer in the headlights the whole time. I was glad though that I had, I was in student affairs for like pretty much 10 years before I made this transition. So I was glad that I had all that experience, because that really did help. I knew how to, do programs and everything. I knew how to interact with people. Now I'm just interacting with, and communicating with physicians instead of with, students all the time and everything. So it was, for me, what I really wanted was to be able to maintain that level of relationship with people, but just do it with like a more mature learner than the undergraduate students that I was used to. So I was glad to have that. So that was, as I kind of acclimated myself to the office and everything, that was really great, to be able to have those skills and to know that people knew, that I had that background and that I kind of knew what I was doing. And then, for me, years 2 and 3 have like been burning everything to the ground and then like building it all up again. And, that's what I joke around and say to people, and everybody in our department now, we're a neurology, not a huge subspecialty. We have we're not, a huge department compared to some other places or anything. So like everybody knows, who I am and what I do. And I have now, I think, just trained people to the fact that, if there is something that it's the way it's always been done, I will just burn it to the ground and change it, and it will be better. And I feel like you don't get to do that that often in regular student affairs type positions. And so the fact that I can get that buy-in and that I can just decide to do that has been great. Autonomy is also something I can relate to, where, my direct supervisor doesn't actually necessarily know what I do on a day-to-day basis. And that's fine. And he's totally fine with that. And other people do, but at the same time, like, people just trust that I will just get the job done. And that's really refreshing to have, especially from former positions where I was severely micromanaged.
Great, thank you for that. I'm a fan of burning it all to the ground too. So the next question I'm going to start with AJ on, and I'm curious if you could do the very student affairs highs and lows. Yep, exactly. The rose buds, rose thorns, happies, crappies. And then a little tag on to this, we had a question come in through the private chat about the salary. And so I'm wondering if maybe we could fold in. So the salary, are they closer to the happies or the crappies on this? If you could speak a little bit towards that as well. AJ, we'll have you kick us off.
Sure. So salary is definitely on the happies. I started at $15,000 more than I was making in student affairs, and now I'm up to $35,000 more than I was making in student affairs in just 5 years. So that's amazing and still kind of shocking sometimes when I look at my paycheck. So definitely on the happies there. On the positive side, you know, for me, so on our strengths quest, because we all know what that is, I'm an input and a learner. And so one of the amazing things about working in a research organization is that they are all about the learning all the time. And so if you are doing something that, as long as it's serving the mission of the institution and of your team, if this is something where you're like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I want to learn about this thing, or it seems like we should be learning about this thing, they're in support of that. So I've had a lot of room to really grow and change within my position. And the whole makeup of my team has changed since I started. I'm the only person left in my group from when I started. So the nature of everything that we've done has changed, and it's been all positive and all within the mindset of learning and growing and becoming better as professionals and teaching other people better, cooler things. They're also paying for my doctoral journey. They're paying for everything except for my books. And so that is also an amazing, amazing perk. So definitely lots of positives. Also, as I mentioned to my colleagues before we started, my office building is a trailhead. And so people will frequently like go for hikes as part of meetings, because that's just part of the culture where we are. And that's a really cool part of being at the organization that I'm at as well. As far as downsides, I think for me, I don't really enjoy having uncertainty as to how I'm going to pay for things. That's unsettling for me. And so being in a grant-funded environment can be stressful. So in my group, we have 3.5 FTEs, and 3 of those FTEs are paid for from core funds, so we don't have to worry about them. But one of my individuals is entirely on soft money. And so we have to come up with the funding to keep him employed, which is cool because it means that I've learned about grant writing and I'm navigating the NSF and things like that. But it's also very stressful because I feel like I'm constantly under pressure to be bringing in funding to pay for this person. And we don't have the ability to say like, hey, I have this cool product I'm going to sell you to make that money. It's all grant writing and proposals and things like that. So I would say that is probably the part that, I don't know if I dislike it, but it's stressful.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Laura, Laura, we'll go to you next. And happies and crappies, and where on that spectrum does the salary fit?
Okay, great. Thanks. I guess too, and I know we'll talk about the job search function or the job search process a little bit later, but from a salary perspective, yes, I think it's on the happy side as well. But I think something that was just very different is that when I applied for the position, the very next step in the process was fill out this and it was like a Google Doc, fill out this Google Doc with a few open-ended questions. But one of them was just, this is the salary range. Are you okay with this? And so it was just right up front before I spent any additional time, any step of the way, that's what the salary range was. So I was like, yeah, no, absolutely. That's great. And I just think that's such a transparent process that just made it so much easier, from a job search perspective. So that, and like I said, I know we'll talk about the job search thing. In terms of things that are, that I really enjoy about the position is, like others have mentioned, the flexibility. I work from home, so that's, that's a really interesting perk, which is also something I don't like, but I'll talk about that in a second. I really enjoy working with faculty, and it's the process of trying, I almost feel like my role is to just sort of, I don't want to say debate because that's not a good term, but it's they're normally here and I'm trying to get them there. And the whole process is making this incremental progress to get to a consensus and to develop trust and rapport with people, some of whom come to the table I will never put my program online ever. Or some are this is great, I'm so excited to do it. And so I just the give and take of it all, I just really find a little bit exhilarating. And when I wrap something up and a faculty member who I thought just was so against the whole thing will send and be I really enjoyed this experience. This is really cool. I'm really excited about what we've created. It's really fun. So I enjoy that. I also really think the benefits, at least at my at my company are tremendous. I didn't think my benefits in higher ed were bad until I was not necessarily in higher ed, and I'm just like shocked. Like one example I'll give is just like I've worked at prior institutions that had a 2-week maternity, paternity, whatever leave policy, you know, and that was it. And so to like be in a different environment that has just like really expansive benefits is really awesome to me. And something I think should be universal and whatever. But you know, that's been something that's been really positive. Some of the things that I guess are kind of drawbacks are working from home, and everyone's experiencing this right now, so it's not necessarily unique to me. But I went from a role where I was in the student union, in the Dean of Students office, and like saw people constantly, and the nature of my job changed so much depending on what like the student concern of the day was, or like what fire we had to put out. And on one level, like that was annoying, but I kind of missed that, like just the kind of being kind of in the thick of things and like having all of that energy, like there is something energetic about that. So it's been an adjustment just like working from home. And then I think the other piece is I left like managing a team in student affairs, and I never thought I was a particularly good manager. So I was kind of like excited to like not have to worry about that anymore. And like, I'm just an individual contributor and that's fine. But I do kind of miss it. Like I do sort of miss like managing a team, and I like am doing everything, which is it's fine. But sometimes I'm just sort of like, gosh, I wish I had like more people to do this with, or things like that. So that's one of the things I thought I was really gonna like, and now I kind of miss having that.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I know AJ's adding things in the chat too about all of her benefits and making us all a little bit envious of that. But no, that's great. I mean, I think that we all want everyone to have this, like Laura said, like more universal treatment like this would be great. Vashae, we'll go to you next about your happies and crappies. And
yeah, I would say that to the salary question, I would put that in the happies category. Similar to, I think it was Laura that said at the beginning of the process, like literally on my phone interview, it concluded with like, we want to push you to the next round. Also, this is the salary. So is that going to be okay? So it's very, and it kind of took me off guard as well, but it was very just upfront and transparent. Additionally, the flexibility is really great. We have the option, even pre-COVID, you had the option to work from home for a number of days. Similar to what I was saying with the autonomy, like no one is tracking like where you are. There's just an expectation that you get the work done. And so if that means that you want to work from home 3 days a week, or if you want to only come into the office 3 days a month, like it's up to you. I never did that pre-COVID. I felt like just internally, like I needed to be in the office. But now that I've created a routine at home, I don't see myself really going back to the office. I've kind of created that space, and that's an option for me. And I think that's great. Additionally, I think that EAB, in terms of self-care, there's like tangible things that they're doing to make sure, or to try to ensure that their employees are taking care of themselves. We get 10 healthy life hours a month where you can work out if you need to go to the doctor, if you just need to take a self-care moment, and you know, whatever it is that you need to do for yourself, you get 10 hours of those a month, no questions asked. You just need to enter them into the system. We also have in our new building that we haven't yet gotten to experience because we're all at home right now, but they put like nap pods in there, which I'm sure will be really great whenever we can go back to work. They've also put in just different spaces as a response to what the employees said that they needed. And I think that that is really great. And this is, you know, one of the first times I've worked in a place that says they value self-care, and there are actual tangible things that they've done that have represented that, other than just like saying over and over, like, please take care of yourself, but please also be up at 2 a.m. for the duty phone, or whatever the case may be. Additionally, I really like that I am not in an emergency response role. Even if I get an email in the middle of the night, there's not a provost that like their first email is going to be to me if something crazy happens. So I don't have to worry about that kind of thing, which is really, really helpful. Some of the things that are not as great, I would say the lens that we come from generally in student affairs of like making sure that everyone is happy and like, you know, like kind of that nurturing piece is not always the case on the business side. And sometimes I find myself in that weird space of like, no, this is the business decision. This is what we have to do. And I'm like, but I want to call them or whatever the case may be. And that's not always the best option. And so sometimes I definitely struggle with that. Also, I would say it's such a large company, which I think is a great thing, but also it's kind of easy to get lost in there as well because there's so many employees. And so it's easy to get lost in the shuffle. But on the flip side, I think it's great that it's a very large company because they work really hard to retain employees. So they have promotion structures within your current position. They like to move people internally and move people up internally in an effort to get people to retain their employees. So it's both a good and a bad.
Great, thank you for all of that. I love Nap Pod's idea. I think it's great. Okay, so Jillian, what are your happies and crappies?
Yeah, so for me, you know, again, I am a state of Maryland employee. So, and I knew, you know, I should say, whenever I knew I wanted to get out of higher ed, I was still specifically looking at nonprofit type jobs because I'm doing the public service loan forgiveness program for my student loans. And so it was really, you know, I'm like almost done. And so even then 3 years ago, like I was very cognizant of that. So I was trying to keep that toe in this area because of that. So this job did offer me more money than what I had been making as an academic advisor, which I don't think is necessarily saying a whole lot. But you know, after my first year and I saw everything that I was doing, I actually asked for a raise. It was the first time in my life I ever did that. And they were immediately receptive to that and gave me a promotion and gave me a higher salary. So while I think that I could still be making more for all the work that I do, I am still making way more money than what I would have had I stayed as an academic advisor, just working with undergraduate students. So I'm in a middle of the road, leans towards happy, I guess. As far as other, you know, highs and lows, I love that I'm still seeing the progress of learners. I'm still involved in that educational process. For, you know, for neurology, the residency program actually in our department is 3 years that they spend with us. And so I just graduated the first class that I actually started in the department 1 month before they started. And so I have now seen one whole class go through from start to finish, which is really great. So I'm still able to form those relationships and get to know them. And, you know, with each class then that I have spent more time with, I have a better relationship with. So that was really important to me. That's really great. The ownership of projects is also definitely a high for me. When I have an idea for something, I'm really lucky in that, you know, my program director is super open to the ideas that I have, and I feel like I could probably sell her on anything, really. So that's really great in that when I pitch something, like she's just kind of like, okay, like let's work it out and figure it out, and then like I get the credit for it. And so, you know, that's not always what happens a lot of times. And so while like our department chair is always happy to like, you know, ultimately like say that it was his, like he's also really great as to actually, you know, attributing who things are for. So I love that it can be mine and I can know that I did it, and, you know, and that people know that as well, and that I get that affirmation. And I mean, honestly, a high for me is that the state of Maryland is really great to work for. I've worked in Ohio, I've worked in Pennsylvania, and now Maryland has by far been the best. We have great benefits. The perks are really great. You know, I mean, I don't know, COVID is obviously going to kind of upset the apple cart with all of this, but, you know, last year, the state had a budget surplus, and so they gave every single state employee a one-time $500 bonus. Like, that was, you know, crazy. And so you know, I love the benefits that I get and everything that they offer while still, you know, having that state employment. Downsides are that, you know, I still work a lot, but I am way happier in what I am doing now than what I was doing before. I loved residence life for the interactions that I did and the program planning that I did and those relationships that I got to form. And now I have all of that without the stress of being in charge of 160 18-year-olds. So that is, you know, I don't mind that I pour so much of myself into my job when, you know, it's super rewarding and I love what I do. But of course, there are times when I wish like I wasn't in charge of so many things and I could step back more. I supervise, like I said, supervising sucks. I fully admit that it is not something I enjoy. I don't think that it's one of my strong, you know, points of what I do. I tell it to everybody. It is, if I could get rid of it, I would. And so for me, like, that's a downside just because that's something that I personally struggle with. But the highs are high enough to make me keep going and to make it through.
Great. Thank you so much, Jillian. And then we'll have Megan close out this question for us.
Yeah, so I would say my salary is it's a weird thing so I'm still hourly because we bill our hours to students. And so that's both should be a happy, but then has been both me learning how to manage everything, but then going through COVID-19 and then all of the anti-racist stuff. Our busy season is usually March through May. So I'm usually putting in the plan was for me to put in 50, 60 hours a week during that time and then going down to maybe half time in the summer. And then both our students got slowed down, which makes sense. Our editors were overwhelmed because most of them worked full-time in higher ed. And then I was just distracted. So I just didn't put in the number of hours I want. So my salary should be near close to double what I was making in student affairs. But I'm just not sure how it's all going to play out because now students are usually we're slower this time of year and I'm still super busy. So I'm hopeful that it'll all even out in the long run. But definitely, since students have been affected, we've been affected, but we're still getting constant business. So it's not, we're fine. We're actually growing. It's just been, I'm not sure how my salary is going to play out, but it'll definitely be on the happy side. It's definitely not going to be lower than I was making in student affairs. That's for sure. But also since there's only 2 of us full time, instead of, so what happened is I started as a part-time editor. And then she promoted me to a director. So I had a team that I supervised. I got a raise with that. And then when I came on full time as executive director, I got another raise. But I do pay for my own benefits, but my raise is high enough to balance that out. So when I was deciding whether or not to leave my full-time job, that's something I put into consideration where I went and asked our HR, you know, what's my total compensation worth? And then I went to my editor-in-chief and said, I need to make at least this. Whether benefits are included or make my own, like this is my bare minimum. And then she went above that, assuming that we got all the hours that we wanted, which hopefully will work out by the end of the year. So there's a little more of a risk, but it doesn't feel risky because we just keep growing. Even during the pandemic, we've been growing and growing. So I would say my shallow favorite part is the schedule, that my job is 100% remote, 100% flexible. I'm a night owl, so I no longer have to struggle through those 9 to 5s. I can work, 5 p.m. till 3 a.m. if I want. It doesn't matter when I do the work, as long as I'm working out those timelines with students and editors and they know when to expect things from me. So that's been a plus. It's also hard to say no to things, like either students or social events, because even my brother texted me last night and he said, we're playing online games, join us. And I said, well, I really should work. And he goes, you can work at 1 a.m. And I was like, okay. So it's hard to manage my own schedule. So it's a plus and a minus there, I would say. But I really like it a lot better than having to conform to the 9 to 5, which is just not natural for me. And it was really always a struggle for me. Really, the best thing about my job is the support I have. My editor-in-chief is just so supportive of me. So we share all the challenges we have together. We work them out together. And it's just, we have that same philosophy where we want our work to be excellent and we want to care for ourselves and our students. So it's nice to know that we're both always coming from a really caring place, both about the business and about each other. And that's been consistent the whole time I've been with the company. It's also been fun to work with the students, and I'm a super nerd. So basically I get to read for a living. That I just read doctoral dissertations all day and learn really specific things about really specific fields. So it's funny what kind of conversations I can jump in now that I know a lot about things no one would think I would know anything about. Most of them are higher ed related, but not all of them.
I'm going to call you in 6 months to edit my dissertation.
Yeah, please do. And then I would say it's really cool to be able to do the work that's needed in the world. So when COVID-19 hit, it was easy for her and I to connect and decide that we were just going to send out a message to the team and say, because most of them are working full-time in higher ed, including one of our directors who's a dean of students, and say, what do you need right now? Do you need us to take over some of your projects? Do you want to take on more work because you're not sure if your job's going to be here in 6 months? Like, what do you need from us right now? How can we support you through this? And so it was nice to be able to give immediately, just make changes to support everybody and what they were going through. And then again, when all the protests started happening, one of the first conversations we had is how can we be more anti-racist as a business? And strangely, you wouldn't think with an editing company, but I find I can do more direct social justice work than I ever could in higher ed, which is weird because I always had the impression that higher ed is the easiest place to do social justice work. And I'm not finding that to be true at all. So the kind of things that we're able to do and the way that we can support students in all kinds of ways has just been really rewarding. I guess the only things I don't like is just like any students anywhere. So some students are going to wait till the last minute. So sometimes I get panic emails from students like, I'm not going to graduate unless you fix my table of contents in the next 2 hours, which means I got to, decide what I'm going to do. Luckily, they don't have my phone number, just my email address. So I don't get those panicky texts or anything like that, but I still have students that I feel compelled to help because I don't want them to not graduate because they couldn't figure out the table of contents. There's also always the unkind faculty who give really tough feedback and then students get really deflated. And so that's hard to be a part of. Luckily, that's rare, but that's still something hard to have to help students negotiate through. Yeah, and I would say, yeah, so the hourly thing is the other thing. I wouldn't say it's a struggle because I'm making it work. It also allows me to teach and all of that, but that's been something to learn how to manage. So I wouldn't say it's crappy, it's just new.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all of those responses. I think it helped people get more of a grasp on, the different roles. I want to move now and use the last 15 minutes that we have to talk about the job search. So that's always a big question on these panels. So I'm going to throw a lot of questions out there, and then whatever sticks for you, speak to it. So don't feel like you have to hit every point. In fact, we won't have time for everyone to hit every point, but tell me about your job search. How did you narrow your search into this? Some of you have kind of already talked about that a little bit. How did you have to modify your resume to be appropriate for this? What was the interview process like? Anything like that, that's what I'm looking for. And if there's any resources that you can share. So I think for this one, I think maybe we're starting with Laura.
Great. Thanks. So I think to answer kind of some of those questions, when I first started to think about leaving student affairs, I was trying to identify sort of like what I wanted to do. And I certainly had moments where I was like, I just don't want to be in student affairs at all anymore necessarily. And so I was kind of doing a few different searches, but I finally decided like where I would be best served was in sort of like a higher ed adjacent space. Like I understood the industry on some level and could use my higher ed experience. And then I could also have the experiences of working in a for-profit or a business space, but then I wasn't totally switching like the content that I needed to understand. And so I think I started my job search looking at probably like the Chronicle and Inside Higher Ed and like those job boards because they have, typically they have like remote roles. I was geographically bound, so that was another challenge. Remote roles or like roles outside of the academy. And so one of the first roles that I saw was for actually the College Board. They had like higher ed consultant type roles, and I interviewed with them. I didn't get the role, but that made me start thinking like there are all of these like companies that are in service of higher ed, and they all sort of have this type of role, like this higher ed consultant role. And I know I have colleagues who have gone on to other companies and kind of done this role. And so once I sort of realized that this was a role that existed, like they need people who know higher ed to like be that intermediary for their clients, like that's, I should start like looking at higher ed adjacent spaces. So honestly, like I just started kind of coming up with a list and I just checked their job boards. And that's how I found my current role. Is I just like, it was on their website. I applied. I found out like right away. I would say like from application to job offer, I mean, it had to have been less than 30 days. So, I mean, it was like I applied, I got a contact, like a short form, like, hey, fill out these additional questions, salary range, etc. Okay, virtual interview with the hiring manager. Okay, virtual interview with the 2 team members I would be working with. Okay, job offer. Like, I didn't meet anyone in person. I only ever talked to like 3 people. I didn't have to do a personality assessment. So it was incredibly brief, which was just like to someone's earlier point, it's like, it's from when they post the job, like they're just regularly looking at application, and there's not necessarily this like targeted window, like where we're gonna keep this open for 30 days and then review all of the applications. It's like this constant ongoing thesis. And the one other thing I would say is that I did rewrite my resume to be a functional resume. A friend of mine had suggested that. She'd left higher ed too, and she was working in the diversity inclusion role at a large company. And so she sent me her resume, and I would, if anyone is interested, I'd be happy to share mine as well, where she just used different lingo, and she kind of gave me some words where she's like, oh, it seems like what you're saying is you do this, like use, you know, like organizational effectiveness. And so like doing a functional resume, like this job was the first job I applied to using the functional resume, and like that's an N of 1. But the last piece I'll say is I also got rejected from a lot of jobs too. So like, or never heard, which is, you know, the other thing where you hear like 6 months later that you're no longer a candidate. I'm like, yeah, I figured that. So I just, you know, it's like, I was at a point in my career where I was like, I don't need to just take I'm going to take a job that's the right role. And I also always kind of advise folks too, like that whatever job you take should just be like the job that can get you to that next job too. Like there's, in my opinion, there's no perfect job. But people can certainly disagree with that. It's just about like, what can I learn in this role that's really going to help me with like whatever that next step is. And it's like this constant progression. That's my management.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. That's all very helpful. Vashae, tell us a little bit about your process.
Yeah, so I actually heard about EAB in the expat group. So as people comment in there and say like, hey, I'm thinking about leaving my job, you know, where are some places that people work? And then there's like 100 comments. Go through the comments. That's literally what I did. And I came across EAB because of that. I came across another position that I applied for because of that. Like, I would just read the comments and people would be like, oh, I do X thing at this company. And I'd be like, that sounds cool. And I'd put it in there. I also use Glassdoor because I think that their notification system is great in terms of when they see new postings and things like that. I also, what else did I use? I think those were the 2 main things that I utilized. In terms of the job and interview process and things like that, similar to Laura, it was very, very fast. I applied for 2 jobs at EAB, and then they emailed me and asked me to do like a logic assessment. And I didn't know which position I was doing this logic assessment for. And then they emailed me and asked to do an interview. And I still didn't know what position it was for. So I just prepped for both of them. And then when the recruiter called, she clarified, and I was like, great. But on that interview, like I said, when she was on the phone, she told me at that time, like, we'd like to get you in for another interview. I came in for that second round interview, maybe like early the next week. I think I interviewed maybe Wednesday or Thursday. By Monday or Tuesday, I was on campus, on the EAB campus for the second round interview. It was with 2 or 3 people. I did have to do a role play, which kind of caught me off guard, but well, they told me before I came, but I just wasn't used to having to do that. And I had to do the logic assessment again. And then it was over, and literally and I had to do a writing piece live there. And when I went into for my writing piece, they said, once you're done with this, that's the end of the interview. You know, we'll call you, we'll let you know. And so I finished, and I came back out of the writing room, and no one was in the lobby. And I was like, should I just leave? Or like, what do I do? So I sat there for like 10 minutes because I was just so used to like having a host and someone shuttling you back and forth. And after I sat there for 10 minutes, I was like, okay, no one's coming. I'm just gonna leave. So I left, and literally I was in DC and I was driving to Baltimore. It's like an hour, 15 minutes or so. They called me before I got to Baltimore. So, and that was on a Monday, and they wanted me to start like 2 weeks from that Monday. So it was a very, very fast process, but I appreciated that because I don't have a lot of patience. So I enjoyed not having to wait. But the interview process was incredibly like straightforward. It was very much about like, tell us what you know. There were no real questions that they asked me. It was a lot of me talking just about my experience. I think through the whole day, they maybe asked me like 5 questions. Well, the whole day, it was like 2 hours, but they maybe asked me like 5 questions, and that was it. So I had to be prepared to talk about myself a lot. In terms of the resume, I would say don't guess. My suggestion would be to look at the job description and match the words from the job description in your resume. Like if you look at the job description and it says organizational effectiveness from Laura's example, don't try to make them guess in your resume what things you did that were organizational effective. Like just put the words directly in the resume. Same for positions that you are leaving. Look at your job description. They have outlined with very nice words what it is that your job is. So look at your job description and use that verbiage. And of course, include other things that you do, because we all know that we take on other responsibilities and things, but don't try to come up with all of that on your own. Like I review people's resumes and cover letters and things like that, and that's always where I start. Don't make them guess. Don't use any acronyms. Don't talk about any programs that you're not explaining, because you don't want them to have to do any of the work to understand what your experience was. You want it to all be on the paper. So that would be my suggestion. Use those specific words and just plop them right on in there, because those are the words that they obviously like and are obviously looking for. So that would be my number one suggestion there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good advice. Jillian, tell us about your process.
So I am a trailing spouse. So I was living in Philadelphia and was an academic advisor at a university there, and knew that we were coming to Baltimore. So like I mentioned before, I was doing the public service loan forgiveness program, and while I really didn't want to do higher ed anymore, I was willing to sell my soul to stay in the program because I only had less than a handful of years left to go. So I was like looking at universities and trying to figure things out, and like, could I find something that would make me happier? And I admittedly got very incredibly lucky in the fact that I actually work now for the same department that my husband is faculty in. So the person who had the position that I am in before me happened to leave in like February, and their HR rep, who was, helping my husband through everything, knew that, like I had this education background and I was there. And so she actually put me in contact with other places involved in the University of Maryland, even outside the School of Medicine, who, had job postings and everything, and got me connected. And I interviewed for, another position with a different school and everything. So she was very helpful for me, and then was like, hey, like, we have this other position that's coming up, and you might be a good fit and you might enjoy it. And so, I applied for it. I went through the whole process. This definitely while like maybe there was like some nepotism involved and that I knew about it, like it wasn't, you know, it wasn't just given to me. And there were, you know, several other people who were in the process. I knew the department chair because he was who my husband had worked for, and he recused himself from the whole process as well. So I really just kind of had to stand on my own 2 feet and make it all happen. It was probably like maybe it was fast for even working for a state institution. It was maybe like 6 weeks from the time that I applied for the job to when I got it. But I did have to come to campus twice, and I had to do a phone interview with another faculty member. That was like more involved than what I thought it was going to have to be. And I interviewed with a bazillion people, you know, just like you would usually do in that kind of a situation as well. So yeah, you know, I kept my resume pretty much the same because I was still looking in those types of places. I'm at the point now, you know, where I would have to make some hard decisions if and when it's time for me to leave this position as to like where I want to go. Medical education though is like this whole huge field that I never even realized existed before. And you know, I would say anybody who feels similarly to me, where you want to still try to maintain a lot of those touch points, interactions, and, you know, maybe because of the loan side of things, you know, it's a great place to look into if that's the kind of thing that you're interested in, because there are tons of different things that you can kind of go and do with it.
Great. Thank you so much, Jillian. Megan, what was your search? I know it was quite different, so if you want to just hit the...
It also can be quick because I didn't search and I didn't interview. So I was lucky enough I was in a position that I felt I was overqualified for, but working for my mentor. And so I wasn't, oh gosh, there's another airplane, so hopefully you all can hear me. I was lucky enough that I had a really good relationship with her. So my side gig was going so well that I met with her about it. And she gave me the option to go down to 4 days a week for 2 months just to try it out, because she was convinced that I wouldn't like editing as much as I like campus recreation, because campus recreation sounds way more fun than editing. And so I tried it out, and then I loved it. I just loved my Mondays were so much more productive, more relaxing, just in every way for my mental health better than my regular office job. And so it was the editor-in-chief had reached out to me saying she was thinking about taking me full-time. I said, can we try this out? She said, yeah. And then she said, I want you full-time. What do I have to do? And so I know that's not totally helpful advice for everyone, but what I would say is like, just because a position doesn't exist doesn't mean it can't exist. So if you find something that you want to go try out, even just part-time, and see how it goes, you never know where that may lead you. That whether it's with that company or another company, that then you've got a little experience, dip your toes, see if you like it. And you never know, it's very different than higher ed. You can just create a position in a private company, and that's what happened for me. So yeah, but I wasn't searching at all. I just lucked out that this wonderful job just kind of it didn't fall into my lap. I worked for 2 years.
You worked for it, yeah.
I showed that I was good at it, but it felt like it felt like luck, even though I know that I worked my way into it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that it's always encouraging for folks to hear how side hustles materialize to something else, because we know that a lot of student affairs pros have side hustles. So that's great.
Yeah, mine was definitely to help pay those student loans that I acquired and then regretted having, because my PhD wasn't helping me. And then my PhD did help me, and so did that side gig. So it worked out.
Awesome. Good, thank you. Okay, AJ, you will wrap us up today talking about your process.
Yeah, so I left student affairs without a plan. I found myself in an extremely toxic environment, and I actually had 2 doctors tell me that I needed to quit my job because it was negatively impacting my health. And so I quit without a plan. Well, my plan was to write fiction. That was my kind of side hustle, fun hobby thing that I do. And so I was like, you know what, forget this. I'm going to go work for myself, and I'm just going to write novels for the rest of my life. And then I checked my email one day, and there was a message from LinkedIn that had a link to this position that was like, I said, my resume plunked into high performance computing. And I said, if I don't put in for this, I'm going to regret it forever. Like, this is just too perfect. I need to at least try for this, even though I'm not sure I'm ready to be working for anybody yet. And it turned out to be this incredible thing. As far as what the job search process looked like, I interviewed twice, both interviews. I think the first one was 45 minutes. And the second time that I went up, it was maybe 2 hours, because they did like a rotation thing. So I could talk to a couple different people for 15-minute chunks. And then I had the job, I think it was like 6 weeks from start to finish. And I asked for an extra week just so that we could go backpacking before starting work. So it was pretty amazing. But just to make sure everybody saw what we were kind of having a conversation about in the chat, is that make sure, and what Vashae was saying, if it says it in the position description, put it in your resume, especially if you're applying in tech or in government, because they use bots to crawl your resume before it even sees a human. And so if it is not obvious to a computer that you have the skill that they're looking for, you won't make it through the process at all. So that's kind of a huge thing for switching fields, because I know we've all sat through like looking over 200 resumes in student affairs. That's not how that works in the rest of the world. So that would be my biggest thing. And just don't be afraid to take a leap. If it looks like it's fun and it looks like you can learn something, throw your hat in the ring.
I love it. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I actually really I didn't realize how diverse the different journeys were going to be on this, but I think it was really great and really inspirational for everyone, wherever they might find themselves right now while they're tuning into this panel. So thank you so much, AJ, Jillian, Vashae, Laura, Megan. I learned so much, and I know everyone who participated did as well. So thank you, thank you. And tomorrow will be our last two panels. We'll do HR and the learning and development and instructional design. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much for setting this up.